Now I'll just put the lens back in here, but I'll notice that's quite loose. It shouldn't rattle around in the front mount like that, so that means that these tabs here are less than ideally shaped. Probably means that something's happened to that. Somebody might have been pulling on it. I'll take that ring off and bend those tabs down slightly and then put it back. I don't think that's a result of it having hit the floor. There would have to be some tension on the lens to have done that. Now these pieces here probably need to be bent up slightly to provide us a little bit more friction at that point, a little bit more tension rather. See if I can. Do they all look fairly even? They do look fairly even. Okay, we'll see how we go with that. All I'm hoping to achieve is just to take the rattle out of it. Because if there's any rattle there, it means that the lens is not being held firmly in one position relative to the shutter. And so that effectively you won't get sharp focus reliably all the time, particularly at larger apertures. Because if the front group and the rear group are not held in the same alignment relative to each other, it means that effectively your focal length is effectively changing. Front self-focusing lenses rely on shifting the focus length in that manner in order to, that's good. That clips on there nicely now. It's not over tight, it's not loose, there's no rattle. That's exactly as it should be. Your front self-focusing lenses, they rely on moving the front lens group relative to the rear lens group to focus, and effectively what they're doing is they're changing the focal length of the combination. A unit focus length, focal unit focusing lenses like this, you take the lens and you move the whole lens, front and rear component, backwards and forwards relative to the film plane in order to change the focal, point of focus, not the focal length. Just wipe around that, make sure that there's no oil or dust or stuff on that thread, and I'll clean the glass. I'd already cleaned the glass on that front component on the inside before I bothered to put it back. It's easier to judge how clean you've got a flat piece of glass or a convex piece of glass than a concave piece of glass like this. But you can tell by looking in from the other side typically. Now that looks good. I'll screw that into place on the shutter. And clean that rear surface. There's something stuck on it there. It's come off. So particularly if there's anything visible on the lens in terms of dust or things of that nature, I usually clean it very lightly with a moistened cotton bud first to remove any loose particles, anything that might cause a problem, and then clean it again. To effectively polish the lens of any haze or marks. There's a visible spot just here, and that will be separation. It'll be the beginning of separation. That's unfortunate, but it's not really something we can deal with, but it's only a tiny spot. I wouldn't expect that to cause any problems to anyone. So with our shims back on there, I'm going to pop this back into the camera and see if we can get the shutter to function correctly. And it wants more than that. One more tooth. It should be it, and it is. Okay, so that's good. That's cocking correctly and releasing correctly. I'll put the retainer ring in place. I'll tighten that down if I can lay my hand on the right tool. It hadn't gone far at all. Get that started, run that down, nip that up. That seems to work nicely. The shutter release and everything's working nicely. I need to clean up the top cover, service the rangefinder, and we'll be done. Where's our top cover? There's a bit of looseness on that meter. It may be that those two screws are a bit loose. They look okay. It looks quite clean. Just check those two screws are tight. They are. I'll take that dial off and clean those controls. Just a bit of dirty old dried grease and stuff under there. Yeah, look at the state of that. Just want to get all that clean. And that grease has probably been there for the last 65 years. What would happen is if this was left sticky with grease and perhaps with dust or grit involved, So it means it would be extra stiff in the movement, and you may end up with a problem where it may not want to turn on the post, and it might actually start forcing the post here backwards and forwards as you move it. Well, that would have the effect of damaging those two screws that hold that on the camera body, and then before you knew it, you'd find that your meter setting dial, complete with pointer and so forth, it parted company with the camera. And if you're unlucky, it'll happen when you're not watching and you've lost it. Some odd little marks on the top here. I'm not sure what caused those. It wouldn't be easy to achieve. Let's get this back on. So, and a little bit of synthetic grease around that cam surface and around the centre where it sits over the boss. Check that that moves smoothly. That's nice. The wavy washer, I'll give that a wipe of synthetic grease as well. It drops in there. And then we've got to get our scale in. This only goes in one way, there's no adjustment for it. And the settings one here. That's seated. It's difficult to get that seated. And getting the screw in is tricky, even on a good day. If I get that loaded up on that tool, it will probably do the job. Make sure that's seated. That looks okay. Want to over tighten that. It's brass, it's quite fragile, very easily broken. That feels smoother than it did before. I'd like to say that it was wonderfully smooth compared to what it was before. It's not, it's different, it's better. Our flash shoe here, our accessory shoe's bent out of shape, so I want that off to clean anyway, so I'm going to have to straighten that up. Effectively, it's somewhat stretched out of shape at the back here, so it's going to need a couple of thumps in the right place to encourage it back into the correct position. And the top cover here, you can see that grime that gets underneath that cover. Now that'll promote corrosion. There's a slight dent just there. That tells me that the shoe has taken a thump at some stage while something was in, probably while something was in the accessory shoe, because we've already seen that the accessory shoe is slightly misshapen, so probably something was in the shoe when the camera took a thump, probably a flash or something like that. Right, so this stuff here, I want to get the glass out so I can clean it, so I'm going to remove that spring from the frame counter. There are two screws that hold this mask in place and the standoffs, and that mask holds the two pieces of glass in place on the front of the camera, in front of the top there. So those parts need to be cleaned, and I need to clean all the inside of this top cover and the outside. With that glass removed, I can get around this and clean these parts a lot easier now. So I'm just using some naphtha on a cotton bud and going right around those surfaces. Now, around the outside of the top cover, and mostly we're probably dealing with finger grease and other nasty stuff. We'll just get this as clean as we can. One way of cleaning camera top covers is to use hot water and normal domestic dish soap. That'll do it. But there are catches. If you've got a top cover like this where you've got painted frame inside there that you can't remove, you don't want to clean the whole top cover in hot soapy water. That paint may come loose, and if that paint comes loose, you're going to have to remove the whole eyepiece, which is staked in place, so that you can repaint it and reassemble it. Now that would be very undesirable and a hell of a lot of work. So don't clean the top cover of a Retina 2C or 3C in hot water with dish soap. You won't like it. That looks fine. Just check that there's no grit and stuff on the inside. It looks pretty clean, this camera. And the accessory shoe, well, I know it's bent out of shape, so I'm going to have to give it a bit of a thump. Little spots of corrosion there, and that's quite normal for things like this, because drops of moisture or bits of dirt get down in amongst this and there's no easy way to clean them off, so they stay there and they cause corrosion. I'm going to deal with this and then I'll be back. Okay, a few judicious hammer blows and the shoe now is all squared up and back to its original proportions. I can see by the marks on that shoe that someone had forced in an electronic flash with a hot shoe contact into it, because that always leaves the same telltale marks. You can see scratches through the centre of the shoe towards the centre here, and that's typical. Now the cleaning of the glass I need to do next. I'm going to do this meter window first. Start with the top surface. I've got my cotton bud quite wet there, and you can see there's a lot of dirt came off that. Of course, it's quite to be expected that that top surface would be quite dirty. It's open to all the fingers and dirt in the world. Now I'll clean the inside surface in the same way. It's certainly greasy. Move the pointer out of the way, clean the other end of that piece of window. That's nice and clear now, that's as it should be. The viewfinder eyepiece here. I'll clean the outside surface. That's quite clean as these things go. And the inside's not bad either. Now the inside I'm just dealing with by putting the cotton bud through from the front, because of course there's no glass in the front of the top cover at the moment. And swirl that all about. Flip it to the dry end and swirl that around there. And see what sort of a result we got. Well, that's not bad. Could do with a bit more. It's probably most difficult if you've got greasy marks on the inside of that glass, because you haven't got full access to it. It's very hard to see the back of greasy marks. That looks okay though, that's quite a good example. Here I'm just chasing loose pieces of cotton round and round that glass. No, that looks good. So, these two bits, they'll certainly need to be cleaned. They're very, very nasty. Let's see if I can get these pieces back in place. Got those standoffs. in the bracket. See if I can get that screw down through the standoffs and into the top cover. Yes, we have one side done. I left those screws loose because I need to get the glass down in there. And start at the end. I've got this piece of glass all clean. Slide that down in place. And the other piece, which I've also got all clean, I slide it onto that tray. And then if I hold this all up against the top cover firmly, I can do those two screws up. And that holds our pieces of glass in place. Just blow those, make sure there's no dust or anything on them, or make sure there's nothing other than loose dust on them, because I'm not exactly closing this up yet. And refit the spring for the counter, the frame counter. Here we go. That should be fine. The position of this screw on the frame counter is going to be wrong because I changed the position of that tab on the shutter cocking rack, which will move it closer to this end of the camera. I suspect that this was in the wrong position to start off with. That all looks good. That's our top cover. Now I really need to do the rangefinder, because the rangefinder will certainly need to be stripped and cleaned. The eyepiece at this end is quite grubby. Both surfaces, inside and out. The front's not much better. Okay, let's see about getting this apart then. Stretch it out, take that pin out. I want my spanner for doing this. Just loosen that up. Here's the piece that they screw into, a little sliding thing that fits in here. And I should have marked that before I took that off, so it means I'll have more fun putting it back together now, because I didn't. Just take that off. Take that mask off there. Remove the rear eyepiece glass. The prism I want off. You only need to take out those two screws to remove the prism. Do not touch that screw there. If you disturb that, the prism will be loose in its holder, and you'll have a hell of a job getting it squared up where it needed to be. Remove that frame and slide out that piece of glass and the mask. And at the front, I'll remove the spring this is sealed in here with some lacquer. I've got to break that lacquer, so I need some acetone to do that. I'll put a drop of acetone on that lacquer there on the bottom surface. Another one for good measure. Did the same on the top. Hopefully that'll soften up that lacquer. We'll be able to get this apart. That'll do. Now normally there's a metal mask in here between these glass pieces, and normally I just flick that with my fingernail gently until I feel the lacquer give way and those pieces will separate. It's not happening. I'll put a bit of acetone down there and down there. The piece of glass with the mirrored lines on it in particular is quite thin and delicate, and any undue force could cause it to break. Well, of course, replacing a plain piece of glass isn't particularly troublesome, but replacing the silvered lines is. So take your time, let the acetone do its work. Someone's been extra generous with the lacquer on this one. That was it. I just felt that glass let go. We should be able to push that piece of glass through. We can. So there's our thin piece of glass with the silvered lines on it. If I just press gently down on that, we've got our celluloid mask there. Our front piece of glass, which is flat on the front, concave on the rear, and there's that metal mask. So all of these parts need to be given a quick wipe with some acetone to remove that lacquer. I'm starting here. Don't go mad because you'll remove the paint from the rangefinder and that's not desirable. So just wipe off those surfaces that those pieces of glass fit into. That's all that's required. Now these other bits of glass and stuff, I need to clean those, the ones that I've just been working on, because there will be lacquer on these. Some of it will just be smears where it's run down from me splashing the acetone about, and there may be more on the edges at the top and bottom where it was stuck in there. I was holding this up to the light to try and gauge from the reflections how clean those surfaces are. Now the mirrored lines are only on one face of the glass, not both faces. You can judge which side of the glass those mirrored lines are on. If you have a look at it and you take your time, you'll be able to pick which side of the glass you're looking at. That's important when we put it back together. The mirrored lines are on the right side of the glass. They don't work well if they're on the other side of the glass because the focal length would be wrong. They would be shifted from the correct position by the thickness of the piece of glass. So this front lens component, I'm cleaning this again with acetone because there will be probably smears of that lacquer on the glass. Again, I'm just holding this in the light, angling it to the window so I can judge by the reflections how clean I've got those surfaces. This is quite clean as these viewfinders go. They're often very greasy looking and the glass is often quite cloudy as a result. This looks pretty good. Okay, the other silvered mirror, that's probably nowhere near as bad because this was not lacquered in place, of course. This was just held in with the clip, and it, to be honest, it looks quite clean. It's a good example. Now back to this undersurface here. I want to get those greasy marks off there where the arm had been running, and I want to get them off because they're likely to, when I clean this in hot soapy water, I don't want that grease being suspended in the solution and then settling on other surfaces. That's good. That's all that's required there. Now to clean this, basically what I'm mostly interested in is cleaning that semi-silvered mirror that you can see there. Now the front surface, the one facing me, facing the front of the camera, that's plain glass. The mirror is on the back surface. To the front surface I can clean gently. And because the glass is quite dirty, that's worth doing. Because it's probably the dirtiest surface. And the less time I have to put this thing in the ultrasonic cleaner for, the better, because otherwise the silvering on the semi-silvered mirror will be cleaned away. That would be undesirable. This mirror, this is the larger of the two frames. You've got two silvered frames, the larger of the two frames, and I want the one with the silvered surface facing the front. This piece, the smaller of the two silver frames, I want that with the silvered surface facing the back. I'll put that back in there, put the retainer in place, and these three pieces of glass will get cleaned in the ultrasonic cleaner. They'll be sitting in a small glass of hot water and domestic dishwashing liquid, and just a couple of drops of that, and then they'll just get 3 minutes, and that'll be enough to clean any contaminants off those glass surfaces. Now obviously they look quite good at the moment, so I mean if you didn't do the job you probably hardly notice the difference at this stage, because I've cleaned the two surfaces, two pieces of glass with the mirrored frames on them, and I've cleaned the front surface of the semi-silvered mirror, so there's not really much more to come out of that, but I like to do a thorough job.